Welcome to Radio Gaianim, bringing you a Sophianic broadcast featuring visionary teacher John Lamb Lash. Today is the 24th of July 2018. The title of this Radio Gaianim broadcast is What's the Message Coming Through the Mandela Effect?
Good question.
So we're putting this show together today because a new and very good friend of ours, an ally, Mr. R, I'm going to call you, he actually wrote to Matt of Quantum of Conscience, as John asked people to do in his last but one radio show. Politely. So our friend wrote to him. I think they had some interaction previous to this. So the response is, thanks. I have seen others talk about the ME as some sort of message, but I have spent no time on this. Because I don't have time to walk down this huge path right now, let me just ask you plainly. If people like you and Lash have been trying to decode a message, what is the message? What do you guys have so far?
And that is a quote from Matt's email
Yeah.
in response to our friend and ally.
Yeah.
So we thought we would answer that rather than getting into an email response, which I generally don't do. We'll answer it publicly and openly. Now, I've never done this before, so this is a new frontier. I've certainly been interviewed a lot on the internet by Max Egan and Lisa Harrison and many, many other people, but I've never quite done this kind of exchange before, so here we go. Where do we start? Well, I'd say we start at the top, wouldn't you? Like, with the question.
Yeah.
Yeah? So, Matt, since we're talking to you, I might address you directly from time to time, if you don't mind. I'm sure that you could agree, or would you agree, that you could get a message in your mailbox. Say you go out in front of your house and you open the mailbox, and it could be just a message, a note, signed or unsigned, right? Well, what's the difference? Difference is, with a signed note, you know the source of the message.
Yeah.
But you'd have to exercise your detective skills. Perhaps the source of the message, the person who signed it was deceiving you, and that's something you'd have to investigate. But I'm using that simple analogy to get this little talk rolling because it allows me to emphasize something I consider of great significance. In the Gnostic investigation of the Mandela Effect, it became clear that the source of the Mandela Effect was using certain parts of it to identify itself. So it was signaling through the, what are we going to call it, the symptoms, the instances of the Mandela Effect, such as changes in logos, changes in movie dialogue, in book titles.
Songs.
Yeah. And it was, in part, the signals that were coming through the effect were actually referring back to the source of the effect. So when I talk about the message of it, I emphasize and I proved in this investigation that the Mandela Effect indeed reveals the source that is producing it. Okay? So what is that source? Everyone would like to know. Well, first of all, I want to say that it's not a source that was an unknown source. It's not a source that came to reveal itself at the moment the Mandela Effect was noticed. It is a pre-existing source. In fact, it is pre-existing all the way back to the origin of the earth, if you follow the Gnostic narrative of our story here on earth. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
Right. So that's a remarkable point to take on board. The source that revealed itself can be given various names. The Gnostics would have called it the Aeon Sophia. During the course of the Mandela Effect, I think in the first 5 or 6 talks, I indicated my caution about using this terminology, although as far as I'm concerned, as a Gnostic, it's perfectly correct and exact to say that the Aeon Sophia, from the Gnostic narrative of the mysteries, is the source of the Mandela Effect. It is, she is, if you wish, the supernatural, pleromic, galactic level agency producing that effect. But I realize that some people who are not maybe familiar or comfortable with that language might prefer something a bit more neutral. So I proposed the term PSI, which stands for the Plenary Sovereign Intelligence. But even so, that definition, which I could say, okay, maybe, Matt, you would be more comfortable with that. I'm saying to you, look, I identified the source, and it comes from a plenary sovereign intelligence. Okay, let's take that on board. Well, there's a question that follows that answer. As often happens when you follow the Gnostic method, each answer prompts another question. So the Gnostic method is a method of continuous upscaling, of learning by asking better and better questions. So plenary sovereign intelligence prompts the question, whose intelligence is it? Now, some people might prefer to think, oh, it's just some disembodied spiritual intelligence. It's some off-world intelligence. It's some other dimensional intelligence. But the Gnostic teacher and his students and followers will not let that go by, because they will pose the question, well, why couldn't it be an intelligence in this world, present to us, accessible to us, right here and now? Why does it have to be off-world? Why does it have to be in some other dimension? And so I propose that it is the actual intelligence of the earth that is the source of the Mandela Effect. And it is the mother planet who is reaching humanity through that effect. And thereby lies a certain problem, which is about talking about the mother planet, right?
Well, Matt, I just spent an hour listening to one of his uploads, and he is talking about how the Mandela Effect affects people and how it affected him and how he came to it.
Matt is talking about
Matt
this.
is talking about it,
Right.
and he's saying, clearly it's something off-world. This is a quote, direct quote, off-world, something magical, something mystical. And he doesn't buy into the quantum D-wave computer.
Excellent.
But he's still stuck in this paradigm of quantum, other world, other realities. We're just here as avatars. Our consciousness is somewhere else, which, is not the case.
It is not the case in the Gnostic perspective of life. All consciousness is embodied. It's just a question of who embodies it or what. So this plenary sovereign intelligence is embodied in the earth.
Well, what is consciousness? This traps everybody.
Mm-hmm.
What is consciousness? So maybe you could just do a little synopsis of what
Well, consciousness is different from awareness. Consciousness is composed of the con, meaning with, and scientire, or some Greek or Latin root, scientir, I think, meaning to know, to grasp. So it means the capacity to grasp with awareness. But it is not awareness itself. There is a pure awareness. There can be a pure awareness in which you don't grasp anything, which is known as a samadhi without content. But when you have the when you have the ground state of awareness, which means simply the ability to pay attention to anything, and you grasp with that awareness, that tool is consciousness. Consciousness is a tool of awareness.
So therefore, what Matt stated, and I quote, consciousness is somewhere else. How can it be somewhere else?
That's right.
It can't.
It really can be. How can you have the consciousness to know that consciousness is somewhere else if
Unless
the
you have
consciousness
it.
is not here and now? By the way, we're on this topic. I don't want to. I'm not intending to bash you at all in this talk. Far from it. I wouldn't enjoy doing that.
No, he seems like a good guy.
Yeah, he does. And I'm, as everyone knows, my fault is that I'm way too kind.
Yeah.
So I'm going to continue and just say, by the way, Matt, that quantum mechanics and quantum physics is a Jewish fraud. And it is a paradigm that does not go anywhere. It is disembodied. It is demented. It is part of the demented scientific mentality of our age. And you would be much better off if you dropped that paradigm and got back to the notion, or at least considered going toward the notion of sensuous, living, mystical, magical, embodied consciousness. Because that is where you go on the path of gnosis.
But from what I gathered from just listening to him speak, I think he said, the Mandela Effect changed my life. I was seeking for truth. I saw all the lies. I saw that the Kennedy assassination was a lie. I saw this, I saw that. And I was feeling really, despondent and depressed about it all. And then the Mandela Effect happened, and it made me search for things that I would never have looked at. So he was looking at, what is consciousness? He was looking at questing for deeper answers to life, and he even mentions the Gnostic text.
I don't know in what context you happen to know them.
He doesn't state what
Right.
what context he talked about the Gnostic text. He just said he was talking about Avatar, the movie,
Right.
saying there is some truth in movies, and no doubt about it, because before the movie Avatar, it goes back to the Gnostic texts. The smartest people that ever lived, Plato and the allegory of the cave, for example.
Okay, let's just stop there for a moment. I made a joke. It's kind of a standing joke in planetary tantra. In fact, I made it many years ago in Santa Fe when I was teaching there in the 80s. I said, I've all invited you here tonight to recruit you into the PIA, which is the Planetary Intelligence Network. And I've also said that this horrible term, intelligence community, which is used for the three-letter agencies which are there to deceive us and manipulate us and destroy us, could better be applied to the Gnostics. They were the original intelligence community on this planet, and they still are. I'm a member of that community, and everyone in PT, everyone who enjoys my work, is part of the intelligence community who find their way by connecting their consciousness with the intelligence of the earth. That's the common ground we have. It's the common ground that you're standing on or sitting on. It's the air you breathe.
Well, it's palpable. You can smell her, you can touch her, you can feel her, you can see her. Every sense is affected by that.
And one more note before I get back to this problem of Mother Nature, Mother Planet, which I'd like to go over with you. In the process of developing Gnostic intel, you run into obstacles and syntax glitches and paradigm problems and traps and trap doors and
rabbi
holes. And in the process of getting around them or correcting them, you amplify the learning experience. This is something that we do all the time. So let me see if I can amplify your learning experience, presumptuously speaking here, about Plato. Plato was not a Gnostic. And although it is said that Plato was initiated into the mysteries, I would correct that by saying Plato probably did participate in the Eleusinian mysteries, not far from Athens, but he was a flop. He flunked out of the mysteries. How do I know that? Well, that's a long story, my friend, but I'll tell you one thing that certainly discloses that Plato did not know the mysteries. Plato, who was a Greek intellectual, decided to leave as his legacy to the world a number of writings, and in these writings he presented what he considered to be his supreme paradigm, which is the paradigm of Plato's cave, which everyone teaches. And Plato's cave is an analogy, a metaphor, that is based on an idea that there is a light and that the light casts shadows, and that all the people in Plato's cave see is the shadows, but they don't see the light. Well, I have made it explicitly clear and proven it to a number of people that there is a light that does not cast shadows. And that is the organic light, which was the ultimate revelation of the mysteries. So I put it to you, Matt, that if Plato had been an initiated Gnostic, he would have never proposed the parable of the cave, because he would have known about the light that casts no shadow.
Yeah, he would have made the parable about the light that casts no shadow.
That's right. He would have made a different parable. He would have revealed what he knew in a different way. So be careful about that. Plato was not a genuine Gnostic.
Okay, so back to when the question of talking about Mother Nature
Right.
and the mother planet.
We've been discussing this, Jenny and I, over the last couple of days, because I woke up in the morning and you know, sometimes questions crystallize in your mind like in a solution, like sugar forms with supersaturation into crystals. And so that's how the mind works. I've used that analogy often, supersaturation. So there can be something floating around in the solution of your thoughts, you know, in the cloudy solution of your thoughts. And then one day it just crystallizes. And what crystallized to me recently was that how people respond to various statements or assertions about the natural, or the supernatural, or divine, or spiritual. So, for instance, if you say to someone, well, God said this, or God said that, or I'm talking to God, or I'm talking to Jesus, or I'm talking to the Pleiadians, or some off-world spiritual entity is speaking through me, you get a fair amount of people who will stop and nod their heads and they'll listen to you, right? Especially if you talk about God, even if it's not the traditional God. You know, Matt, you may be a Christian. You may have your own idea of God. I don't know.
I don't think he is. He did allude to the fact that he was talking about other Christians. So
Okay.
I don't think he is.
Anyway, get my point. If you broach a conversation based on the loose notion of communicating with God or the Pleiadians or the Ascended Masters or something, people will listen to you. They're intrigued. On the other hand, if you make the point, which has very often been made,
They're intrigued, or they're being tolerant, because they might not believe in God or Ascended Masters or any of that stuff, but it's acceptable. It's acceptable in human discourse for people to speak like that, and because people who have religious beliefs their beliefs are untouchable. That's what a lot of people think or say.
right?
That's why it's acceptable.
Exactly. Talking just in a loose sense about discourse and broaching a line of discourse is something that you do. You as a commentator on YouTube, I do it as a teacher and commentator. And there's a certain receptivity to that kind of talk.
Yeah.
Okay? On the other hand, if you go to the question of nature and you open a discourse on this topic of our alienation from nature, which is a profound and deeply significant topic, pretty much opened up by the Romantics during the Romantic movement in the late 18th century. Well, many people will nod their heads and they will listen, they will agree. Wow, well, you know, whatever else is wrong with us, the fact that we came forth, our species came forth out of the natural habitat, out of the womb of nature, and today many people live almost entirely disconnected from nature. They're wired up to electronic devices. They're in a field of shortwave radio emanations, 5G, everything. I mean, how many times have you heard this discourse? So if you start to talk to any group of people about that, you're bound to see them nodding their heads and saying, oh yeah, nature is really important. Mother Nature is really important, right? So you've got discourse on the off-world God, or the disembodied spirit entity, is acceptable. Discourse on Mother Nature is acceptable. But then if you say, like the Gnostic teacher says, Mother Planet, something happens. I detect that something happens.
Yes, it does.
People either balk or they kind of glaze over. I don't know why that happens, honestly. I've been mystified about it for a good number of years. And I'm not going to speculate about it now, but Jenny will attest that is a fact.
Yeah,
that we encounter, right?
yeah. I mean, I'm wondering if it's purely because it's just not in the discourse of tolerable things to say.
Well, there is a bridge to be crossed here somewhere. There is a threshold to cross, because while it is easy and acceptable to discourse about communicating with nature, there's another factor that comes into play when the subject is communicating with the plenary sovereign intelligence of the earth in direct intercourse with that intelligence. That's Gnosticism. That is body-based nature mysticism or biomysticism rooted in the Gnostic teachings. And I have detected that there is a certain resistance to that through the years. So, back to your question. What is the message coming through the Mandela Effect? Well, the message is, first of all, coming from a particular source, which is the mother planet. It's not coming from Jupiter or another galaxy. It's coming from the planet on which you live.
So you were right, Matt. It is magical. It is mystical.
Indeed. Yeah.
Everything you said.
But it's not off-world.
Yeah.
No.
It's in-world.
And because it's in-world, and you are in her world, and you are in the habitat of the divine experiment where she placed you, according to the Gnostic sacred narrative, you have every opportunity to interact with her. And so the Mandela Effect is, first and foremost, a signal drawing the human species to interaction with the mother planet and with the galactic source of our species. That's what it is. I can't put it any simpler than that. And I think I must have said it 100 times in the course of those 70 talks. Okay? So now let's move on to the question of the ping. When I began to decode the Mandela Effect, I used the example of a ping. What is pinging in IT? It's like when your cell phone sends out a signal.
Ping me.
Yeah, it pings. I don't know exactly how it works, but the ping is the signal in the IT electronic network that gets the attention of a device. So when you call me, you're actually pinging my cell phone. When you Skype me, you're actually Skyping pinging my Skype app, right? So everyone knows what a ping is, right? But just imagine that I, John Lash, send you, Matt, a ping, meaning that it's a prelude to a message I'm going to send you, and you stall on the ping. You just keep hearing the ping, 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 but you don't pick up the ping in such a way that you can then be in transmission to the message coming your way. So, what I showed at the beginning of the Mandela Effect was that these many, many instances in the 16 categories I described are, first of all, just pings to get your attention. Now, I can make an assertion on the basis of my experience as a Gnostic teacher, and I'm not alone in this because there are hundreds and hundreds of people in Planetary Tantra who followed my work who could, out of their own mind, out of their own understanding, could make the same assertion, is that she is pinging to humanity at large, and this is a novel experience. There were many instances that can be cited showing how the mother planet communicated with people in the past. The highest example of that communication was the Gnostics, who had direct access to her mind, as I've shown in Not in His Image. But up until recently, that interaction was limited to an elite group of shamanic seers, those in the intelligence community who had the method and the discipline to engage in that interaction. What has happened now, and this is a momentous change, with the Mandela Effect, the mother planet indicated that she was ready to broadcast to the entire human species, even at the normal and collective level of attention. So she went, and this is a delightful point about the Mandela Effect, which we all laughed about quite a bit. She went to the lowest level and the lowest common denominator to get people's attention.
Pop culture.
Yeah, pop culture. Names of cereal brands. Kit Kat, you know? What does it mean that some people remember Kit Kat with a hyphen and some people don't?
Oh, I've got a lovely little story about Kit Kat.
Yeah?
Some friends of mine who have a dog that I used to take care of a lot, he had a Bonio jar, which is a dog biscuit, a big dog biscuit, and he was a Labrador, so again quite fat. And he used to just get fed these Bonio bars randomly throughout the day, and I looked it up, and one of these Bonios is the equivalent to him eating a chunky Kit Kat each time. So I made a label and sellotaped it to the jar saying Kit Kat, and I did it with the hyphen because that's how I remember.
Right. So that's how you remember it as a hyphen, because you put a hyphen in it for the dog.
And then later on I was talking to, months later I was talking to them about the Mandela Effect, doing the biblical changes just to spook them. They had Bibles in their house that had the changes in, so they were floored. And I said, what about Kit Kat? And the woman said, yeah, I saw that hyphen, and it doesn't mean we don't love you. But there was never a hyphen in Kit Kat.
There you go. So this is one good example, we could cite dozens, of a signal coming through on the most mundane, trivial, banal level. Why is it coming through on that level? Because in the first attempt of the Aeon Sophia to reach the species collectively, that is to say, to reach not merely an elite who are able to access her, but to give access to the whole species, she chooses that which is at the most common level of attention. She gets your attention at the level where your attention is.
That's the ping.
That's the ping. But each instance of the Mandela Effect can be distinguished by this standard. Some instances are merely pings. They're simply there to get people wondering, get people questioning, get people thinking, hey, maybe something's trying to reach us or something's trying to get my attention. By the same standard, there is a second category, and that is the category in which the ping leads your attention to a coded message. So that is the case with Kit Kat. Mm-hmm. It's not just a ping without a coded message, there is a coded message in it. And that message is about toxoplasmosis and the archonic infection of the human brain, which has been brought to our attention through the behavior of cats.
So mind parasites is something that we're going to come back to at the end.
At the end, that's right.
Something that Matt said in that upload, which I found really interesting, is that he said, well, I'm going to take credit for trying to put this one out, and he was dismayed that it didn't really catch on. But he said, quote, the new reality is almost inferior.
I don't know exactly what he meant by that.
Well, he claims it's the greatest fingerprint we have to figuring this thing out.
The ME.
Yeah, me, yeah.
But the new reality it's bringing us to is almost inferior. Is that what he means? I don't want to paraphrase him wrongly. Perhaps that's what he means.
Perhaps that's what he means.
Well, I would agree if that's what you mean, Matt, because the new reality of consciousness, the great awakening to the connection between our species and the Divine Mother appears to be in the world today a mere trickle compared to the massive amount of deceit and brainwashing and propaganda and lies to which we are subjected. Mm. But it's only the beginning of her correction. And in the beginning, it appears as a mere trickle, which you might compare to a tiny trickle that comes out of the mountains somewhere in, in Kenya, and then develops into what you call the river of the Nile. It starts as a tiny trickle.
Which flows upwards.
Which flows northwards.
Weirdly.
Due north.
Due north.
Right. So, okay, we're at half an hour here. Let's keep it tight, keep it concise. Let's get back to your question. What is the message coming through the Mandela Effect? The message is about Sophia's correction. It is about the activity of the planetary animal mother. There are many names for her. Currently, in her correction. Now, what is Sophia's correction? Well, if you go back and you read the Gnostic material, you'll find that this concept shows up. But it's only a clue. It's a word, diorthosis. I've extensively discussed this word over the last 15 years. And the way to understand this or to approach this is to use the metaphor of the divine experiment. So I elaborate this in the early talks on the Mandela Effect. Now let me just rephrase it very quickly. One way to think about the human condition today, where are we in the cosmos? Why are we here? What are we doing here?
What's it all about?
What's it all about? What is my purpose? Where did the human species come from? Where are we going? One good overarching metaphor, not to answer that question, but to provide a framework for discovering answers, is to say we're in an experiment, a divine experiment. And I introduced this metaphor, but there's a trick to that proposition, which was clearly elucidated by the Gnostics. That is, we are in a divine experiment that has been hijacked. There is a problem in the divine experiment. And that problem is due to the intrusion of an alien parasitical mind virus, the archontic infection.
Which is the only explanation for all the lies, deception, pointless wars.
That's right. One can get extremely confused and lost in trying to work through all the deceit that we face. But taking the Gnostic intel on the archonic intrusion gives you a ground to see through all those forms of deception and to hold steady against those forms of deception. The Gnostic intel on the archons is, in my opinion, one of the single most powerful feats of knowledge of our entire species. And it is of enormous benefit today and absolutely essential to our survival.
Mm-hmm.
So, let's go back to the pings. I said that some of the pings are merely there to get your attention. I don't know about jiffy. Jiffy might refer to Kali Yuga. It might be coded with a reference to Kali Yuga, because Kali Yuga is the moment of right now. Kali means now, this instant. So if I were to say off the cuff that there is a message embedded in jiffy, I would say that the message is, the planetary mother says, you better get onto my signal and get onto it in a jiffy. Get onto it fast, because this is going to unfold really, really fast. And it is a fast process, wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
So, but basically, again, some pings are encoded with a message, and I showed that some of the pings, some of the instances of the Mandela Effect actually point to this archontic infection and warn us about it. They are particularly contained in the 6 translations of the word Mandela, right?
Yeah.
Right. There are 6 translations, and they're in German. And the reason why they're in German is something that you discover when you go into the Mandela Effect.
Decoded.
A number of the signals and messages embedded in the Mandela Effect point directly to the Germans, to Hitler, Volkswagen logo, Henry Ford, to the Third Reich, to the idea of a master race, and to the idea of genocide. So, what is the message in the Mandela Effect? Part of the message is a warning about white genocide, which is only the prelude to the total genocide of all races. And it's a warning of who this threat comes from, where this threat comes from, and how to defeat it. So the message is complex, but what I'm doing here, trying to do, tell me how I'm doing, Ginny, is to just unpack for you some of the elements of this message, which is a momentous message.
Yeah.
So one other thing that I want to point out is that my investigation, my decoding of the Mandela Effect was developed closely in parallel with what I call celestial intel.
Yes.
So you might want to listen to a talk, and I'll link it in the description that I gave at the end of the Mandela Effect, called The Future of the Mandela Effect. You might just want to listen to that one talk to give you an example of how I use the celestial intel to track the Mandela Effect, and in turn we get confirmation from the effect itself that it knows that we are tracking it. This is interactivity with the divine intelligence of the planet, which is the source of the Mandela Effect. How are we doing?
Good.
Okay. So that pretty much covers my notes. I would mention one other concept that might be helpful. In order to break a code, there is a certain kind of code. I forget what it's technically called. It can just be called a book code. For instance, suppose you take a book like Light in August by William Faulkner, and you take a particular edition of that book. Let's say it's a paperback edition that's now gone out of print. And you go to that book and you choose letters. You choose letters in this way. You open up a page, 23, you go down to line 7, and you choose the 6th letter. So the number code is 23-7-6. So that's a code for a letter, say the letter F. And so you write a message using that code. Now I've pointed out that a child can compose a code like that if they were told how. An 8-year-old child could. And nobody can fucking crack it. Nobody. A quantum computer could not even crack it. How do you crack a code like that? You have to have what is called the cipher book. And the cipher book is simply the book upon which the code is based that enables you to then know that these sequence of 3 numbers refers to a page, a line, and a letter in that line. Simple enough. Once you know that, you can read the code, right? Well, the Mandela Effect is similar to that, which raises the question, what is the cipher book or cipher text to use
to break the code?
To break the code? And the answer to that is the Nag Hammadi writings. I prove that.
Which is Gnostic text.
Which is the surviving Gnostic text. And I prove that over and over again by concrete and exact examples. Mm-hmm. So you might ask, again, every answer in the Gnostic method of learning prompts another question. The questions get sharper and better. The process is an enjoyable process. So you might ask, well, how can it be that the writings in the Nag Hammadi provide the cipher text for decoding the Mandela Effect? Well, it goes back to what I said before. One of the intentions of the mother planet, Sophia, is to bring your attention to her as your source. She wants to bring her attention to you. She wants to get the attention of the entire world by hacking into the internet and hacking into the zone of advertisements and serial names and
pop songs.
And pop songs, like the Bee Gees, know. Do you really mean to learn? She's asking you, Matt, do you really mean to learn? Or do you just want to know? Well, there are a lot of want-to-knows out there. Okay? So, this is really brilliant because then you see that it makes perfect sense. Why? Because the Nag Hammadi materials, pitiful as they are are the only surviving materials we have that tell who she is and tell a story. So it makes perfect sense that if the ME is coming from her, it would be embedded with coded signals that point us to that material.
Well, she is mentioned in other cultures, isn't she?
Yeah, but her complete and coherent story is not mentioned. And there's also a lot of disinformation about her coming from various sources, right? So did I cover that pretty well?
Yeah, do you want to go back to Interview with the Vampire?
Right. This is a great example of a ping that's coded. Now that was a huge ping for a lot of people.
Yeah.
You said that, Matt, that got your attention. That stunned a lot of people.
Yeah.
And they were scrambling all over the place in their attics to find old copies, what they call residual, of the occluded form, which was Interview with a Vampire.
And of course there was an interview with the writer of Interview with the Vampire.
Yeah, that's right.
Who said the original words.
I can't even remember what she said.
Well, it was Interview with the Vampire.
Was Interview with the Vampire, but I remember it as Interview with the Vampire. By the way, it doesn't matter which memory line you have. Like, Ginny and I don't share the same memory line on quite a few
Often,
things.
yeah.
No, that doesn't matter. It's not a division of humanity into one memory line or another. It's not that kind of selection process. You select yourself to be interactive with her by paying attention to the signal. That's how the selection works. So that happens to be an incidence of the Mandela Effect that is profoundly coded with a warning. Right. So I'm not going to name any names, but I will refer to the JRM, if anyone knows what that is. So let me just put it this way regarding that Q. Well, Interview with the Vampire. Well, who is the vampire? Well, everybody knows who the vampire is, right? Vlad. Vlad the Impaler. Yeah.
What a hero.
Yeah, what a great romantic hero. What a brilliant, brilliant hero to protect, who protected Europe from the Muslim hordes, you know. And there's a great story, what we've been told about Dracula, and all this Hollywood, melodrama about Dracula conceals a most beautiful race romantic story about Vlad.
And it's Romania is the only culture in the world that doesn't have vampire stories in its folklore. The only country in the world that doesn't have it, and yet Vlad was made into Dracula. Yeah,
and I explained how that came about through certain conversation in London at the end of the 19th century. But also, for your delight, I would add that that the Aeon Sophia is pointing to a clue encoded in the land of Vlad, and that is Romania. And if you look at the Gnostic materials, you'll find that the Coptic word for humanity is Rome. So by pointing you to that, she is actually calling you. She's calling you Rome, my magical child. She's not just calling the individual species, she's calling every single member of it who cares to give her the full attention she deserves and she requires, okay? The other question is, well, who is a vampire? What does that question imply? Well, it implies that you could walk down the street of any city, like New York City, and there could be vampires all over the place.
Well, there is.
And there are. Right? And there are. And who is a vampire? But it goes even deeper. I draw your attention to October of 2017. And on October 5th of 2017, there was an event that occurred, the alleged Las Vegas shooting at Mandela Bay. So the word Mandela was encoded in the location of that. The word Bay refers to a victim of JRM in the most famous case of vampirism in recent recorded history. But you can go and investigate. And so, who is a vampire? Well, in the case of that file, which we investigated at length, the name of that vampire was Favel Schneerson. Right.
Yeah.
So the point I'm getting at, to you, Matt, and all the other people who are listening, is that the message coming through the Mandela Effect it's vast. You know?
So there is no one single
There is no one single message, but there's a warning, there's an invitation to the organic light. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? That's a reference to the organic light, which is the most beautiful sight any human being can behold. Mirror, mirror is a reference to the way that the Aeon Sophia uses the third attention, the mirroring attention. And there are so many verifications. What you see in this investigation is that the verifications that the Gnostic way of decoding are correct come from the effect itself. They are proven by the effect itself. So, it's a vast answer to your question, but to boil it down to a sound bite, the message is that your Divine Mother is accessible to you. Her mind and intentions and purposes are accessible to you to interact with her for the correction of the evils operating on this planet.
Good. Okay, I'm just going to finish here with... so I was looking at Matt's work. I hadn't really paid that much attention to him before when he was doing the Mandela Effect because he's got quantum going on and I tend to run the other way.
He's got a quantum virus running. Delete that virus from your mind.
So his last upload, which was a couple of days ago I think, was just him. It was a minute or so long, and it was just text saying, link in the description is about the best video I have seen in months, and unfortunately it's a link to Thomas Sheridan's Breaking the Babylon Mind. Now, Thomas Sheridan, where do I start? You've done an interview with him, haven't you?
I did several interviews with him.
About handling the psychopaths. It was a long time ago. Thomas Maloney hosted that.
That's right.
Thomas Sheridan is, at the very least, a sociopath, or at the worst, a psychopath. He pretends that he's an expert on psychopathy. He's got no training. He describes himself as a punk, artist, whatever. He used to work for Goldman Sachs. He claims that people who question the Holocaust are psychopaths. He's so full of... He pretends to be a pseudo-intellectual, and he says nothing. I mean, we listened to a little bit of this upload that Matt recommended, Breaking the Babylon Mind, and it is utter drivel. Utter drivel.
Not only that, to the extent that there's anything true in it, it's obvious to many people already, especially those of the Truth Core, that, there is a massive mindfuck going on, and this is how it works in general terms. But to expound on it like he's some kind of expert on neurosciences, or like he's revealing some kind of deep metaphysical secrets of consciousness, is completely ludicrous. It's just, that's the way Sheridan is. He's a blowhard, and he's totally full of himself.
And so there's a quote here from him. The reality is that apart from their own kind, talking about psychopaths, other self-proclaimed non-idiots, most people find such arrogant and obnoxious debunkers and hardcore skeptics to be strangely angry and boorish, and often confrontational to the point of hysterical. So many of them seem to lack basic social and behavioural skills when debating with their kook of choice. Their absolutism can be staggering at times. Now, this is a man who was a professional troll. He professionally trolled Irish media.
That's right.
I suggest, Matt, you go and look at a website called The Real Thomas Sheridan. Thomas Sheridan is not a truther. Thomas Sheridan is a pretender and a liar, and will lead you down the wrong hole. You will not get any truth from it. He actually told people that the James Wright Foley Mossad fake beheading, that he knew the family.
Oh, really?
Of Foley. even though Foley's alive and well.
Trouble with pretenders of that type is, like a certain tribe to which we often refer, they're so advanced in their psychopathy that they don't even know when they're lying.
Well, he's diagnosed himself as a borderline sociopath.
Oh, has he?
Yeah. Self-styled punk rock psychologist. I mean, what the
Okay, so we're not going to waste any more time
on him.
bashing Sheridan. I'll just close with this remark. I listened to the first opening of this babbling from Sheridan, and he makes a really strong message, puts a really strong emphasis on some message about parasites, mind parasites,
yeah.
mind virus. Okay, that's a meme. Wouldn't you say mind parasite is a meme?
Where have I heard that before?
Yeah, where does that come from? In fact, who were the first people who warned us about mind parasites intruding upon the divine experiment on earth?
Well, it's the Gnostics.
Yes, it was indeed. And if you read Not in His Image, you'll see that the whole archontic narrative is clear as day. And although the meme or metaphor of mind parasites is widely used today, unfortunately, those who use it are not all or often grounded in the Gnostic material. So in closing, I make my case to you that by grounding yourself in this Gnostic material, you really acquire the tools and the skills
And discernment.
and the discernment and discrimination to cope with, overcome, and overturn many of the problems that you are discussing. So all I can say is it's a treasure trove of wisdom. Oh, by the way, the other comment. Matt, I believe you said somewhere that the Mandela Effect phenomena is so big that no one man can solve that riddle.
It is, he said, quote, "It's something that is beyond the scope of any man to figure out the cause."
Any man to figure out the cause. Well, I don't know what to say. I ask you, did it take one man to write Ulysses by James Joyce? Did it take one man to write Finnegan's Wake? Did it take one man to direct Avatar? How many men directed the film Avatar? As far as I know, just one. I'm not alone in this investigation, and I'm not the only one who's developing it. I just happen to be the inceptor of the process. It's a process, and I initiated the process, but I'm not the single and sole authority.
Well, and I would like to add that when people joined MED channel and started to get the decoding of the Mandela Effect, they were joining in the process as well. So they were unravelling clues. They were going for it.
They were finding clues. They were producing original material.
Yep.
And as my last message to you, man to man, I would like to ask you a question. Would you like to produce original material? As far as I can tell, you don't produce original material. You do what most people on the internet do, is you're a commentator. So I think that you have a great passion for knowledge. And may I propose to you in closing that in the Gnostic path you don't get lost. You find a clear way of pursuing knowledge, and you also gain the ability to be original with the knowledge that you produce. Many of my students and allies in PT are original and producing original material. The church ideologues and Christian fathers who condemned the Gnostics hated them for that reason. They wrote in their polemics against the Gnostics that they're know-it-alls and smartasses who are continually writing book after book after book and producing all of this new material. And they didn't like that because they wanted the world to be confined to the dogmas that they were shoving in everyone's face. So if you put yourself in that category of truth seekers who want to produce new material and not merely be commentators, take a look in that direction.
So that concludes this broadcast, and thanks TP. We're going to use this one to sign off. Stay in the dream and keep it real.